What I'm going to cover in the next hour or so is a condensed version of about a 150-page report that was just published within the Audio Engineering Society as a technical document. And I'll show you a link to that in a little bit. It's free for anyone to look at, but it's all about managing on-site sound exposure and off-site noise pollution, primarily for outdoor events, but there are quite a few things to take from it for indoor events as well. So here we go. Right. I imagine looking at kind of the talkers that are at this event, a lot of you probably don't know who I am. You've probably heard John dropping my name in his presentation quite a few times yesterday, but I'm kind of one of these academics who lurks in the shadows quite a bit. And, my name's on a bunch of technical papers, but you might not see me too much out in the real world, so to speak. So I might as well let you know who the hell this guy is talking to you for the next hour. A little bit about me. If you go back to when I was a teenager, up until when I was about 17 years old, I knew for sure I was going to be a musician for the rest of my life. I was going to be a professional musician. That was it. Nothing else to worry about. I had my life figured out. Then I met enough musicians who told me, yeah, you shouldn't be a musician if you're good at something else. Don't do that. So I said, all right, well, don't know what to do otherwise then. But I was looking for a summer job after I graduated high school. And through gigging around the Chicago area, which is where I'm originally from, I knew Gary Gand, who runs Gand Concert Sound. And just on a whim, I called Gary up and said, hey, can I have a summer job? He kind of laughed at me at first and said, do you really know what you're getting yourself in for? Do you know what you're signing up to? And I said, well, I have no idea. But, why not? It sounds cool. He basically said, I'm going to throw you in with the sharks. And they'll either devour you or you'll come out the other end and then you're doomed because you're trapped in this industry forever. And kind of the latter took place. The first month was gruesome. I won't mention all the horrible tasks they made me do. But I got through about the first month and they seemed to decide I was all right. And I continue to be affiliated with Gand to this day. We're going on close to 20 years now, actually, with them. So the plan from 18 years old onwards was going to be a sound engineer. That was going to be my thing. I'll do that for the rest of my life. Once I finished, I went to university, studied electrical engineering, just because enough people told me that was the thing to learn. So I split my time for a while where I was doing about 6 months out of the year as a sound engineer for Gand. Other 6 months out of the year, I was a student. And I won't repeat how many Sunday nights I drove overnight from Chicago back to Southwest Ohio to my university, drop off a truck at the Gand shop and then drive overnight through Illinois and Indiana and Ohio to make my 8 a.m. lectures the next day. I don't recommend that. I was young and stupid, but there you go. I got my experience that way. But anyway, once I finished with my undergrad, I said, well, I don't know much about acoustics. And, I've done enough gigs by this point to know that acoustics is important. I need to know a thing or two about this. And I looked around the U.S. For programs, and I just couldn't find one that ticked all the boxes for me. I wanted to do proper acoustics with all the mathematics and all the gory physics and everything involved. I wanted to properly do it. And I ended up landing in Edinburgh, up in Scotland, for their MSc in acoustics. And the plan still was do it for a year, 1 year master's. That's how they do it in the UK, and head back to the US and back to live sound. That was about 12, 13 years ago now, and I'm still in the UK. So bye-bye sound engineer and hello academia. So one thing led to another. Did my PhD down at University of Essex, looking at audio engineering topics. And then at the end of that, the University of Derby, which is smack in the middle of the UK, or England rather, they were looking for an academic who knew electronics, knew acoustics, worked in live sound, and was active publishing cutting edge research. And I can count on one hand the people in the world who fit all those categories, and I'll have fingers to spare. So it was just the right place at the right time, and I'm still at Derby, and I love it. It's a great place to be, doing research, teaching the next generation of engineers. Life is good. So that's me. That's who's talking to you. And we will head into the content. I should say, more importantly, I think we get stuck in with, the technical side of things. But the most important thing to me is I'm a father and a husband. That's my wife, Sam, and my 2-year-old Harper. That was actually the last time we were on a plane. This was in early January after our winter trip back home to Chicago to see my family. Little did we know it was probably going to be the last time we see my family face to face, probably till 2021. But that's, what keeps me going. It's my family. And, I love audio and all that, but if I had to choose between the two, the people on the screen right now are going to win anytime.
That's crazy. So they're in Chicago and you're in Derby or you're in the UK?
No, my family, those three, we're all in the same house here.
Okay.
Talking about my sisters and my mom, my dad, and, extended family. Yeah. No, we're all together. That would be rough if if we were separated. Okay, so on to what I need to be talking about here and what I promised to be talking about. I led an AES working group for the past 2 years or so, where we focused on sound exposure on-site at big events and noise pollution off-site, where generally our goal was to develop a set of recommendations outlining what needs to be done to address the issues of sound exposure noise pollution due to the outdoor entertainment events, with an emphasis on practicality and preservation of high-quality audience experience. So we're looking for solutions that actually work, that we can implement practically. And I think this kind of carries on nicely from Vic's presentation that he just did, where he really had an emphasis on practical issues. And we've kind of kept that focus as well. Anything that we're recommending is going to be practical. It's not going to be some kooky idea that an academic dreamed up, in some university building somewhere. So we formed the group in February 2018. We got an initial report just about a year later, and a few other drafts followed, and we published the final report just last week. And again, like I said, it's free to download. And yeah, I'll give you a link in a second. But this is the cast of characters that contributed to this. Certainly some familiar names. I know a few of the people on your screen now you've heard at Live Sound Summit already. You've heard from John Burton. I believe you've heard from Michael Lawrence. You've heard from Bob McCarthy. And you're hearing from me. So, Christian Mountain Man. Christian's an absolute character. If you don't know about Christian, he's a biologist. And he got sick of working in a lab all day, working in biology. He gave that all up and decided, I like live sound, I like gigs, I like music. I'm just going to start inventing stuff in live sound. And he's been doing that ever since. Fascinating guy to talk to if you ever get the chance to kind of get him over a pint or two. And John looks grumpy. That's probably after he's had to lecture some of our undergraduate students. He's really nice. He's just trying to look intimidating in that photo. But anyway, you see that we have a wide range of contributors here from all corners of the industry. We have manufacturers involved. We have a few academics involved. We have some acoustic consultants involved. We've got Duran Bagalt, who some of you, most of you probably don't know who that is. Effectively, Durand is the acoustic consultant for NASA. So when I started looking into, okay, how much sound are the people in the front row of an audience, let's say, exposed to, I couldn't find much information other than what NASA's published. So I had to get in touch with Durand, and he sent me some very interesting reports, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So we do have some link-ins with actually what NASA's doing. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with the people on your screen over the past couple of years. Everyone is coming from a different area in the industry. They have different priorities. And we've kind of, I guess, crammed all these into this report in a way that kind of ticks all the boxes for everyone, and everyone signed off on the report in the end. It is critical of some of their work, but to be fair to them, and my hat off to them, they accepted that, some of the shortcomings of their own work. So anyway, this is the report. There's the cover page. It's AS technical document. You can grab it offline. There's the link. I think someone will share it in the chat, but it's free. Give it a read. That'll give you bedtime reading for at least a week or two. But we cover all things from what the audience is expecting to hear to what the audience is receiving in terms of noise doses. We look at system design. I'll talk about aspects of that in a little bit. We look at all the noise regulations we could find in the world. So we went over about 1,000 or so regulations, compiled those into some useful tables, and basically highlighted the ins and outs of the noise regs, no matter where you are in the world, which gave us a very good handle on what areas of the world are doing noise regs right and what areas are really lacking in this area. From there, we looked at the methods available out there to predict noise in the community, how to measure that noise, which is extremely difficult to get right. We're still working on that, really. How to monitor it and how to manage it, how to make everyone happy. That's what we're trying to do at the end of the day. We want the musicians to be happy. We want the audience to be happy. We want the people in the local community to be happy. And that's tricky. But there are at least ways to get close to this ideal. I'm not saying it's ever perfect, but yeah, we'll see what we can do. And then last, we went through some noise suppression techniques. What can you do to limit the noise bleeding into the local community? So we're going to go through the 3 core areas of the report. We're going to first look at the audience. We're basically starting at the stage and working our way out. We'll look at the community. And then after we've looked at those 2 kind of key stakeholders, we'll talk about engineering problems. Really what this is going to consist of is I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions. So I don't have time to go into all the technical detail in this report, but I can talk about the questions that came out of it. These are questions that we don't have answers to all of them yet. The research isn't there, or the research that claims to have the answers is so heavily biased and flawed that it's not worth the paper it's printed on. So probably some controversial things coming up, but I have to tell it like it is because there's a lot of work we have left to do in this area. Okay, so question number 1, you'll notice that I've numbered the questions and you're not going to get all the questions because I don't have time for that. I've selected the questions that I think will be of most interest to you as a group of professionals. So the first question is, what's the best approach for measuring and monitoring audience sound exposure? If you read the regulations, and most of these are based in Europe right now, if you gig in Europe, there's almost certainly going to be a national regulation for audience sound exposure. Whether it's enforced or not is a different question, but there'll be something on the books. The question is that, how do you measure this? A lot of the regulations say measure from the loudest part of the audience. Okay, but I'm not going to stand there the entire show with a measurement microphone in the middle of a mosh pit. All right, I'm not going to do that. My equipment's going to be trashed. I'm going to be trashed. Not happening. So we need a practical solution to implement some of these regulations. The easiest place to monitor from is front of house. What we're saying in the report is we agree with that, and we're not really going to recommend anything else. What we need to consider, and what a lot of the regulations do suggest, is taking calibration measurements. And a lot of the software out there allows for this already, where before the audience comes in, you take measurements, identify where the loudest part of the audience is, and essentially calculate a transfer function between that measurement point and front of house. So during the show, you can get a good enough estimate of what that loudest part of the audience is receiving. And within some of the regulations, they do state that that's acceptable. That's, in terms of the law, that's okay for them. So measuring and monitoring, it's tricky. I think it needs to be done from front of house unless you're going to get a volunteer with a noise dosimeter to wear that and, kind of inflict, maximum sound pain standing in front of subwoofers all day. But we're looking practically at this. And the problem right now is that not all the regulations are on the same page. And in most parts of the world, there are no regulations for this. But as I'll get to at the end of this talk, that is going to be changing probably in the not too distant future. One specific regulation that I I do want to at least highlight, because it's sort of a sign of things to come, I think, is a technical standard in Germany. The limits it gives 92 dB LAEQ, so that's A-weighted, averaged over 30 minutes, and it limits you to 135 dBc peak. So it's considering both kind of your mids and highs and your low frequencies. It covers both. You might say, well, 135 dBc peak is extreme. I wouldn't go anywhere near that. I'm pretty sure you all have. I did a case study at a festival in Chicago last summer where I measured it. And every day of the festival, in the front row of the audience, we were hitting 140 dBc peak, no problem. Just over the past couple of days, I've been analyzing John Burton's data from his last Prodigy tour, and not to kind of embarrass John too much, but his front of house measurements are approaching 135 dBc for some of the shows, which probably isn't surprising considering the Prodigy and how many multiple meters of subs they had. But these are limits that we're actually coming up against quite often. Elliot says, I thought 140 dBc was pretty common. Yeah, it is. You measure from the front row, you'll be getting that at most big gigs without much strain on the system, I think. So they say measure at the loudest audience position, but they do encourage relative measurements. So I'm taking the calibration measurement from the loudest point before the audience gets there and then monitor from front of house. But they do note that that's problematic because how do you know where the loudest point in the audience is? Will that change throughout the day? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? The thing that I want to highlight with this is that this technical standard has been used in legal cases over the past couple of years. There's about half a dozen that I know of where audience members have successfully sued event management for subjecting them to dangerous noise levels and hurting their hearing. There's been big legal suits in Germany due to this. To my knowledge, it only exists in Germany at the moment, but I think it'll spread through Europe very quickly and on to the rest of the world. So this is not going away, and we need to be aware of this and make sure we're covered as audio engineers to make sure legally we're not going to be pulled up on this.
Can I ask a question, Adam?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, man. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought the UK had standards just like this Germany one, 87 dB, and there's an upper limit and a lower limit, and all that kind of stuff.
They do. They do.
Okay.
What's different, to my knowledge, between the UK and Germany is that the German regulations have been used in court, where audience members have sued successfully.
I see.
That's the difference.
Right.
If you look at any European country, they have these regs on the books. But it's the actual legal cases that have come out of Germany that's different. That concerns me quite a bit. Next question, kind of on that topic, what's an appropriate sound exposure limit for the audience? I'll talk about it later, but I'm part of a WHO initiative where they're grappling with this idea and want to have some sort of international regulatory framework on this. Unfortunately, all the medical data out there, or the vast majority of it, is based on A-weighting. And that goes back probably 80 years. They just don't look at C-weighting. All the medical professionals work in A-weighting. That's the language they speak. So we just don't have a lot of information on what's safe in terms of low frequency. We just don't know. So the number that's been kind of been kicking around now for a while is 100 dBA. And then the question is, what's the integration time? Because there's a massive difference between 100 dBA measured over 1 minute and 100 dBA measured over 60 minutes. Okay, 100 dBA over 1 minute, that's a moderate level show. Your shorts aren't going to be flapping in the breeze there. 100 dBA over 60 minutes, that's going to be pretty loud. There's a huge difference between that. And at the moment, we're really all over the shop with the existing regulations. I've pulled this from our report. This is probably the only table I'm going to show you this talk. And this is showing just within Europe, the different regulations. You'll see in the columns more to the left, you have your primary limit for the regs. They're all A-weighted. Most of them are sitting around 100 dB or so. but the big difference is the integration time. So how long are you taking that measurement over? Austria is at 1 minute. Belgium's at 60 minutes. Sweden, you're talking about the duration of the event. So if you want to have a really long event, a really loud event, have it really long. If your event's really short, it's going to have to be quieter. That's just how LEQ works. You just have less dynamics. They do have lower limits for children's events, which I think is a good thing. But it's all A-weighted, which, again, the chats I've had with John at work at the university, it's great for him because he can hit 100 dBA no problem over 15 minutes at a Prodigy gig, and he can have all the sub he wants. But I think from a health standpoint, I feel a little bit dirty once I've kind of looked into the stuff, and then I'm going back to Chicago designing systems and subjecting people to a lot of low end. I need to know an answer now. I need to know what's safe and what's unsafe. And at the moment, I don't know. I can't tell you. All I can show you is this is what countries in Europe think are safe and unsafe. So you can see those secondary limits. Some of those are C-weighted. Some of them are peaks. Some of them are LEQ. But again, it's all over the shop. No one really agrees.
Hey, Adam.
Yes.
So Kim wants to know, when we say over 60 minutes, this integration time, are we talking average, RMS?
It's average. So it's averaging the linear sound pressure over that time period. So every sample point, you take your linear sound pressure, you add it all up over that time period, and you divide by the full time period. But it's linear, a linear addition and division before you convert to dB. If you do it in logarithmic, you're not going to get the right answer. So yeah. And it's a rolling average. So you're just taking a 60-minute window and it keeps sliding along looking at your data. So hopefully that answers the question.
Cool, yeah. And Elliot wants to know, is it true that most of the environmental noise regulations are based on industrial gear, which doesn't have the same peaks, dips as we create with music?
Yes. It's all based on the occupational noise and industrial stuff. Part of our report looks into noise-induced hearing loss versus music-induced hearing loss. And to borrow a term from one of the contributors, Joss Mulder, the science is murky. Music-induced hearing loss, there's just not a lot of good science out there on it right now. But I think there is something to it, and I think there is a difference. Right now, the regs we have are based on the industrial side of things and occupational noise, because that's where the science is. Okay. So I've listed some of the key documents out there, mainly from the WHO, that have come out over the past 20 years or so. In 2018, they released environmental noise guidelines for Europe, which I know some of us were excited about because they were going to talk about leisure noise, which is us. It encompasses live events. Unfortunately, all they said was couldn't find any useful, good scientific research out there to make any new recommendations. So just go back to the 1999 guidelines and stick with that. So the WHO has realized that there's just not a lot of good research in this area right now. We have a lot of things we still don't know. And that I'll talk about the Make Listening Safe initiative at the end of this. Quick note, some of you may be interested in what NASA has to say on the subject. NASA's been looking into low frequency exposure since the Apollo program, so going back to the 1960s. Looking at some of their documents, they're preparing for deep space missions. And so they're looking at astronaut sound exposure at low frequencies over very long durations. For their low frequency, they call that 1 hertz to 80 hertz, and they look at it in 1/3 octave bands. What they say for their absolute limits for their crew is 145 dBz, so that's unweighted peak. For any 1/3 octave band, and over the entire spectrum, 150. And that's your limit. If you're above that, they're not going to put someone in that vehicle. They do have a note of caution saying that if your noise is located between 50 and 60 hertz, your chest starts to resonate, causing whole body vibration, a lot of discomfort, and a lot of annoyance over long periods. So they say, even if you're not hitting those absolute limits, if you're looking at 50 to 60 hertz noise, it's going to be more problematic. And look at that. This is where a lot of our low frequency energy resides at live events in music. So it's something to consider. It's not just our ears, it's our whole body that's experiencing this. And I know John touched on this in his talk yesterday. The bottom line, what NASA says is that earplugs aren't suitable. Okay, you can't even bring up earplugs when they're looking at these levels. They say they're not going to work because, yeah, you might block off your ears, but that sound is going to be transmitting through your whole body, going right up into your inner ears. And that's also been followed by militaries across the world where their personnel are being exposed to significant sound pressure levels, where they say they realize earplugs aren't the end-all be-all of hearing protection. Okay, moving on. Again, stop me if I've said something crazy or if you need clarification. We ask, what are the physiological and psychological effects of high levels of infrasound? So now we're looking at the sub 20 hertz region. Chatting to Bob McCarthy as part of this work, he made clear infrasound is not going away at live events. Part of the excitement of live events is feeling the sound. And I think I'm as addicted to it as anyone else. I love low end. The more of that you can give me, I'm happy. But what we don't know is how this is actually affecting people. And the people I'm most concerned about are the people in the front row of the audience when you have ground-based subs. Again, I've taken measurements at a medium-sized festival, it's not even a large one, where the subs are on the ground, the audience can more or less reach out and touch the subs. And they're getting about, on average, if you take a 5-minute average, between 120 and 130 dBc right the way through the festival. And I can't say what that's doing to them. I don't know. I know when I stand there, when I'm tuning a system, stand there for a few seconds, my eyeballs are shaking, my teeth are rattling, I feel kind of funny. And I'm thinking, there's people who sprint in at these festivals and stay there all day at that spot. And that can't be good. Although it may be kind of dislodging things that have been kind of in their digestive tract for 20 years. And maybe that helps, but it can't be healthy is what I'm saying. I looked through the research on this to see what is out there. If you look at some of the old stuff, they tested humans up to 170 dB. Believe it or not, this is going way back. It's a big no now. Yeah, Kim says the brown note, right? Literally the brown note. The effect of infrasound seems to depend on the nature of it. It's not kind of a one-size-fits-all thing. Some of the studies found that it gives you heightened sensitivity, makes you more alert. Other studies found that it makes you drowsy and fatigued. If you talk to John Taylor at DMB here in the UK, he talks about some link between the runner's high and thumping bass at nightclubs, where the runner's high is where you get halfway through a marathon and you feel like you're about to die. And then all of a sudden the endorphins are released in your brain and you feel great. And it's from that constant thudding of your feet running through the marathon. And John's theory is that you get the same thing at gigs with thumping bass, where we get addicted to it, we have endorphins released, and we feel good with a lot of low end. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. I think it's a bit too difficult to decouple the audio effects and all the other substances that may be consumed and their effects. But it'd be an interesting study if someone could pull it off. But the scary thing to me is there have been some studies on lab animals more recently where after long-term exposure to low frequencies and infrasound, they found that neurologically they're deteriorating and pretty much every other system in their body is slowly deteriorating. It's not over extreme lengths of time that they're exposed to this. So it just makes me wonder what we're doing to ourselves and to the audience members. And I should mention the security guards who always seem to be leaning up against the subs in front of the stage. What's happening to them? No one seems to ask this question, but I don't have an answer. Don't know. So how do we do more work? I think it's getting volunteers to strap some noise dosimeters to themselves and see what they're actually exposed to.
Hey, Adam, what does neurological deterioration mean? In what way? Is it cognitive dissonance? Is it like, I'm not sure.
We're talking purely physiological. I mean, they can't interview the lab animals, but they're looking at the neural connections in their brains and finding that they're deteriorating, they're disintegrating.
So the entire system, someone's organs, their brain, everything, is that, yeah? And what is long-term exposure? You said that it's not that long-term. Is it over like 3 hours and somebody's out of it for a day? We just don't know.
Well, I think from the research I looked at, they're saying the full recovery time is roughly 48 hours from a typical exposure that you would get at a live event. The lab animals were exposed for multiple days to this before they started seeing these sort of effects. So it's a bit longer where we get breaks in between the gigs. My point is that we can't say for certainty what's happening at events because the science isn't there. No one's done the work. But there are a few key papers out there. The AES report points to these where they've been done at festivals with volunteers just to get a starting point, really, in understanding this. So I'm just conscious of time. I want to keep moving so we can get through some things. We already talked about this question, really. Considering all this, do earplugs do anything? At low frequencies, probably not. At the last WHO meeting I was at, one of the audiologists presented a study they did where they looked at professionals who were trained how to use hearing protection. And they said, okay, pop your earplugs in, and then we're going to measure how well you deployed your hearing protection. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was 70% of them didn't put their earplugs in properly. And so the earplugs were only partially effective. So even if you get people who are trying to protect their hearing with earplugs and assuming that they're appropriate, the majority of people don't seem to be using them correctly, even if they're trained. So it's a big concern, and it really shifted the WHO's focus from getting hearing protection to everyone, which I think is a non-starter. You can't ask a whole audience to put earplugs in, to looking at system design and seeing what we can do with the system design to keep things safe, but still keep it at a level that excites people. That makes for a good gig. Okay. What should be best done to educate audience on the risks of sound exposure? In some places in Europe, they put up signs to warn you. There was a study done where they actually put festival goers through a proper full-day course on hearing health. And the findings showed no statistical change in people who protected their hearing. They received all the information, but said, well, that's nice, but I'm still going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I think, especially looking at kind of teenagers going to gigs, I don't think, you can expect them to be wearing hearing protection. I didn't when I was a teenager. I have the tinnitus to prove it. You need other ways. You need to focus on system design, which is why a lot of the other talks you've seen at this summit are really important, because I think that's where it starts with system design. A few things to consider with the community. So these are not the people on site who are paying to, hear what's ever on stage and maybe see them as well. Can't forget the visuals. But the people off site who aren't paying to hear anything, they're paying their mortgage, they're living there, and they're getting annoyed because of what we're doing. So we need to try to minimize that annoyance. So what's best practice to achieve a high-quality audience listening experience, so make everyone on-site happy while keeping everyone off-site happy as well. So here's an example from Rocket Science. I took this from one of Christian's papers that he published at a conference a few years back. You do have these secondary subwoofer systems that are meant to cancel the sound propagating off-site, at least the low frequencies. I'll touch on this again in a few minutes, but it's one option out there that we are seeing a little bit in Europe these days. And it has been proven to be pretty effective, but I'll come back to that. In more general sense, we want to try to minimize the sound offsite, but not detract from what's happening on site. We still want to have extremely high quality listening experience and I guess feeling experience as well for the low frequencies. This was touched on by John and I'm sure others, but when you're planning for noise control, is there any way to predict or correct for sound refraction? So that's temperature changes in the air, which change over the course of a day, which bend the sound waves either up or down and back again. I think all we can do here is I don't think we can effectively control this, but you just need to be aware of it. If one of your responsibilities is noise control, be aware that as you go from day to night, the sound is going to propagate differently. There is some really wild cases that I've heard of where the sound gets trapped in a boundary of cool air and propagates effectively one-dimensionally for miles and miles and miles, almost unattenuated. And I've talked to a few acoustic consultants who have measured this for themselves from outdoor music events. It's a rarity, but it does happen. You just need to be aware that that could happen. So when the local authorities are tapping you on the shoulder, you have an explanation. You know maybe what's happening. In terms of controlling it, unless you're working for the American government or the Russians or the Chinese who have implemented Tesla's research on weather control, you probably can't do anything about it. You just need to be aware of it. Predicting noise annoyance. What's the most accurate way of doing this? Is there an accurate way of doing this? I had a master's student who did his dissertation on this last year, and he did a really good job trying to come up with reliable annoyance thresholds. But he found that these really are variable. It's based on your hearing health. It's based on your past experience. It's based on your listening preferences. It's based on your attitudes of what's going on down the street. So it's really tricky to try to stick up a microphone and say, well, this is going to be annoying, or this is not going to be annoying. This may be one of the most difficult things to really deal with when we're talking about offsite noise, is how do we know if people are going to be annoyed or not? There are a lot of suggestions out there. If you look at the literature, most of them are conflicting with each other. Others are extremely biased, where if you read it, it's clear that they started with their conclusions and then fit their experiments to meet their conclusions, which is garbage science, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people say if you have over 20 dB difference between dBA and dBc, or Z, that has the potential for annoyance. And a number of people use that at least as a first indicator, saying we might have a problem here. I did come across a model developed by Zwicker, who was a European professor around for many years and really the authority on many areas of psychoacoustics. He developed a model that actually seemed to be very accurate in predicting annoyance from any sort of noise, including music. It's a very complicated model, which is why you don't see many people implementing it. It's not something you can stick a sound meter up and get a reading. It takes quite a bit to get that in place. Relative duration and level, that's from NASA, looking at a trade-off between how long is the annoying sound lasting for and level. They did a test where if someone's exposed to very loud sound for a certain duration, followed by very quiet sound, their annoyance actually doesn't go up as much. So it's kind of being conditioned in a sense. So maybe do your sound checks really loud and then dial it back a little bit to limit annoyance. But again, that was NASA looking at their stuff, so it's not necessarily applying to music. You have some people talking about absolute C or Z weighted. I think if you look at the regulations, they're moving quickly away from absolute measurements, and they're looking at relative measurements. Measure the background noise and see how far above the background noise you're sitting, and that's a much better way to go about it. And it kind of can adapt to the environment then. Absolute A-weighted, I won't name names, but there were 2 reports that were commissioned by different UK government bodies about 10 years ago, looking into annoyance due to noise, various types of noise. They were commissioned to 2 professors within the same department at the same university. The reports were submitted at the same year, and they both had completely different conclusions. One said you have to use C weighting for off-site noise measurements to determine annoyance. A weighting is completely useless, where the other one said absolute A weighting is all you ever need. Don't think about anything else. Don't consider it. A weighting is the end-all be-all. And these guys are working in the same department at the same time, working on the same subject, and they couldn't agree on it. So that's where we're at. It's messy.
Hey, Adam, do you want to do a couple questions, or do you want to keep going?
I can do a couple questions.
Okay, so Manuel wants to know if you know of any free software available, maybe for measuring LEQ SBL over 1 hour.
Yes, free.
Yeah, I had trouble with that too.
I can't say off the top of my head. All the software I use is is licensed.
Sure.
It's hard to say.
Pete wants to know what the approach is going to be here. And I think you're talking about that now, but he's kind of wondering, is it just control of volume? I guess he wants to know what you think the end solution is going to be.
I'll get to that at the end. That's kind of what I'm building up towards.
Cool. And Liam says, how would you even test for that without doing it miles away from people not involved in the test?
It's kind of sort of the $1 million question there. How do you do it? I know in the UK and Europe, they do have consultants going around with meters around the communities during events, but they're not going into people's houses. And I'll get to in a little bit, once the sound gets in someone's house, all bets are off. What's going to happen? So yeah, if you can give me that answer, I'd be very grateful, but it's tricky.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. One study that I just quickly want to highlight as one of the good studies out there was done by the Danish Environmental Protection Agency going on 20 years ago, where they stuck with A-weighted measurements just because that's where the regulations were, but they looked at low frequency content, where they took a whole bunch of different real sound sources and tested annoyance at different levels. And what the results came out with was that the two most annoying sounds were the drop forge and music. Everything else was much further down. It was the drop forge and music that really annoyed people. And I thought that was just striking, no pun intended. That we're right at the same level, more or less, with loud industrial machinery in terms of what pisses people off. So the paper's been referenced there. You can see more detail on it if you look at the report. In a more practical side, like I said at the beginning, practicality is key. Communication can get you a long way towards minimizing annoyance. Vanguardia, they're a consultancy here in the UK, have been doing this for years. If you've worked in the UK, almost certainly you'll know Jim Griffiths and have worked with them before on big events. What they do is they alert residents prior to an event saying, look, this is going to be happening. This is when it's going to be happening. And this is what we're doing to minimize the noise coming into your house. What they do during the event is provide a noise hotline. Say, look, if you're pissed off, if we're being too noisy, pick up the phone, call us, someone will be there, and we will log your complaint and let the people in control know about this. And that's been proven over many years to work really well in minimizing noise complaints, even if you're doing really loud gigs. And really, Vanguardia is great at that. Another company that's kind of taken it a step further in the UK is SBL Track, which those of you who've been around for a while will know Chris Beale in the UK. He was kind of one of the top dogs at SSE for a long time. He's ventured out and formed his own company, SBL Track, where they do noise control and monitoring for festivals and motorsports, where they give all local residents a free app to download. And what that does is they can log their complaint, and that goes straight to a monitor at front of house with a map on it. So it shows you the map, shows where you are, shows where that person is, and you can see the complaints popping up and say, okay, we're shooting too much sound in this direction. On top of that, he has a very sophisticated model that gives you an estimate for what level they're getting based on the sound power estimated coming out of your sound system. It's an absolutely mind-blowing bit of software. He doesn't promote it much because I don't think he needs the extra business. And I think actually I got an email from him yesterday saying he's rebranding the whole thing. There's not much out there online about this, and he does that on purpose. But if you know Chris, track him down and ask him for a demo of this. My mind was blown when I first saw what this could do. Really useful stuff. And then DB Control in the Netherlands. This is Marcel Cox's company. If you've worked in Europe, you probably know Marcel. He's been doing this stuff for longer than I've been alive. DB Control gives sound guards to big events, where this is the person who communicates with all key stakeholders at the event, both on-site and off-site, and make sure everyone's happy. So all the expectations are made clear beforehand, all the protocols are in place, and putting that in place, from what he reports, really minimizes the complaints you get from the neighbors. So communication is key. Without even talking about system design or measuring anything, you communicate. Good communication helps. And I think that's in most areas of life. And then kind of drawing on that, is it possible to standardize the noise monitoring practices? I'm going to not go into this in too much detail just because I don't want to throw the rest of the summit too far off their schedule. But basically, from my experience, a lot of the U.S. festivals I've worked are in phase one, where you kind of turn up and you're like, what level should we deal with? What should we shoot for? I don't know. We should probably have a sound level meter. We'll take some measurements. If there's problems, you figure it out then and there. And moving between phase two and phase four, kind of up in the complexity, you start monitoring the whole period, you report on things, you think about special solutions, you're proactive, you do prediction models using software like NoiseCalc from DMB or other software, not just promoting them. And you, in phase four, you have complete transparency of everything you're doing. Anyone can look at your data in real time, and really, you're not hiding anything. And that's really what, at least in Europe, I think they're moving towards. I think at least aside from the very big, largest events in the US, I think we're still kind of in phase one and phase two. That's my opinion. I don't want to go into this topic in too much detail because I can talk for hours on room modes. It's a problem, let's just say. When noise goes offsite, you can measure it outside someone's house. Once it goes in their house, if the low frequency noise hits on a room mode of their living room or bedroom, you could get a 20 dB boost. That's a problem. I'm not going to go into anything any more in detail there, but it's extremely problematic. And everyone's house is different, so it's not a one size fits all sort of thing. It's, luck of the draw whether you hit on a room mode or not. But from my research, it is a reported problem.
Excuse me. Let me interrupt you for a few seconds. Actually, this graphic there is showing only the low end. So effectively, if we are try to doing maximum of control of low directivity with a gradient subwoofer or end-fire subwoofer array, for example, it can be a good reason for the promoter or the event organization to explain these issues for the noise pollution outside. It can be a good argument, right?
Yes, absolutely. The more directional you can get your low end, the better. I'm not going to get into subwoofer design because I know Nathan's talking about that later.
Yeah, of course, but you answer.
But yeah, absolutely. That should be kind of one of the tools in your toolbox is directional low end. That can help.
Yeah, I'm not covering anything related to that. So if you want to get into subwoofer design.
No. We don't have time for that unless you want to be up all night. Okay, I'm going to move on. I just want to mention this because it's out there. Rocket Science provide this device that you can distribute to people in the local community, and they claim it cancels out the low frequency entering their house from the event. And that's about all I can say about it because Christian still hasn't wanted to give me data on this, but he says it's been effective in the gigs that he's implemented this on. It's something to consider for the future. Are we able to, if we can't correct the noise at the source, can we correct it if we need to at the receptor? And at least from what Christian has said, it has been effective in some extreme cases of making people happy and limiting annoyance. But I don't want to dwell on this at all because I don't have the data to really back up any of that. Okay, moving quickly along, I don't want to spend too much time on the engineering solutions because I suspect you've talked about a lot of these over the course of this week. I do want to mention this debate between flown subwoofers and ground-based subs. I know we use ground-based horizontal arrays to beam steer the low end, which really can help keep it off-site. But the downside to that is that then you're really exposing the front of the audience to quite a bit of low-frequency noise exposure, which may turn out to be very unhealthy. So interestingly, there's been some tests done in Amsterdam where their conclusion was that flown subwoofer systems cause more noise pollution offsite. And because of that, in Amsterdam, it's now illegal to fly subs. That conclusion was very flawed, let's just say. That test did not include a flown subwoofer system. That's all I should have to say. They didn't test a flown subwoofer system, but their conclusion was that flown subwoofer systems cause more noise pollution than ground-based ones offsite. And City of Amsterdam said, okay, that sounds good. It's illegal to fly subwoofers. You have to put them on the ground. And that was that. So I'm not convinced by that at all. Looking through the research, I think there is a small difference in between flown and ground. I think if you do some electronic or physical steering of the flown arrays, you can avoid any problems. The only thing maybe to think about is the bounce off the ground. But that's all I want to say on that. It's just that there are cases where faulty experiments have caused really nasty regulations and really limiting regulations. One more bit on flown versus ground. You hear a lot of people talking about loss of waterhouse effect if you fly the subs. L Acoustics have done a really nice paper on that a couple of years back, just saying, no, you don't lose your 6 dB when you fly the subs. They said at worst, you lose about 4 dB, and that's at worst. But in terms of efficiency, delivering equal sound to the audience, you're doing much better if you can fly the system. And the plot I've shown here, I've stolen this from Etienne's paper. A ground-based left-right system, you have roughly 30 dB difference between the front and the back of the audience. If you manage to fly a central subwoofer array, which I know is a rarity, but if you can do it, you're getting about 6 dB difference between front and back. So by definition, that is a much more efficient system. And you just don't have to pulverize the people at the front quite so much. So just leave that thing to kind of simmer in your brains for a little bit, but read the paper. It's an AES paper. I think they've made it open access. So give it a read. If you're interested. Quick note on virtual bass. This is something that I've been interested in for a long time. Virtual bass is effectively tricking your brain into thinking there's more low frequency presence than not. It's something that's been put into Event Acoustics Bass Creator product. It's basically Kees Neervoort read my PhD thesis a number of years ago and said, yep, that's a good idea. We'll do that. And this is what it's doing. It's looking at your input signal and saying, okay, offsite, we have a problem at, let's say, 63 hertz and 80 hertz, for instance. You'll apply a parametric EQ to notch out a little bit of those frequencies, a few dB, that's it. Then, in parallel, you're running a bandpass filter on those frequencies with whatever you cut out and applying virtual bass to it. So subjectively, the audience is getting the same thing as long as you don't overuse it. You're still getting that low frequency content. Maybe not the impact, but it's just cutting out that little bit of physical reproduction to ensure the neighbors stay happy. And if you don't overuse it, it's a great thing to do. I've applied it in a number of ways over the years. But if you overuse it, it destroys the sound of your sound system. So use it sparingly. But again, papers down there that you can get off my website, which I think they'll share the link at the end of the presentation. You can download that for free and give it a read. Right. Going back to John Burton again, he did a bit of interesting research for his master's thesis up at the University of York, where he did some experiments on a tour with the Prodigy, where he looked if there was a trade-off between subwoofer system bandwidth and preferred listening level. In a nutshell, it looks like you can get away with a lower overall SPL if you extend your bandwidth to the infrasonic region. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done here to prove this, but I thought it was one of the most interesting reads that came across my desk for a long time and really made me think about this bandwidth versus level trade-off. There's something in there, but obviously for the noise pollution, if you're extending the infrasonic range, then it's opening up a whole other can of worms. But topic for another day, I suppose. And how effective are secondary systems? So these are the ones that are there to cancel the low frequency going off-site. Talking to the people who do these, the neighbors are annoyed sometimes before you even flip on the system because they see a wall of subwoofers across the street and saying, well, this isn't going to be good. Don't know what it's like vertically. So if you're in a high-rise apartment building, is it only working on the ground plane? What's happening above? Don't know. The experiments haven't been done yet. But I think it's at least intriguing what these things can do. You're looking at kind of between 10 and 15 dB attenuation offsite. this one, I'll skip over quickly. There was a question that came up of whether, if you're using sound level monitoring software at front of house, if engineers will automatically drift towards that level. So if your mix was quiet and then you saw the screen, said, "Ooh, I got 5 more dB, I'll make it louder." If that's an effect. The data I've shown here is a small venue study from Australia where they did see an effect. The quiet gigs got louder and the louder gigs got quieter, all converging on that limit. I repeated the test at a music festival and didn't find that at all. So I think on bigger stages, you don't see this with maybe more experienced touring engineers. They know what level they want to mix at, and regardless of what the number's saying on the screen, that's what they mix at. And the data I've been looking at from the Prodigy's gigs, I think that backs it up. It's scary how consistent John was from show to show. He sits right at 100 dB, and it doesn't really go off that. Okay, I'm coming towards the end. I know I'm just about out of time. If you can give me a few more minutes, Nathan, hopefully I can breeze through the rest of this.
Hey man, you got 14 minutes.
14 minutes. Oh, perfect. I won't need that long. This is what this is all leading to. The WHO, the World Health Organization, Make Listening Safe initiative. I imagine some of you may have heard of this. Others, this will be the first you're hearing about it. I think, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I think is that this is going to have an impact on all of us at some point. They're developing an international regulatory framework on audience safety for live events. And I think this is going to be built in, or at least inspire regulations throughout the world. And my hope is that we can get enough of a word in with them to make sure it's not something that completely screws us over as engineers. So it's a 3-stage process, what the WHO are doing. Their first step was looking at, portable listening devices, earbud, listening to music. They finished this work. They put out a standard with the ITU last year, 2019, where basically this is what it boils down to. For adults, you get 80 dB for 40 hours per week on your personal listening devices. For children, you get 75 dB, 40 hours per week. I wasn't involved in this stage of the project, so I can't really go into detail about that. It's not my area. But I believe the standard is open access, so you can have a look online and have a poke around. But that work is done, and that really wasn't what concerns us. That's what concerns, someone sitting on a train on the other side of the carriage, and you can clearly hear what they're listening to, which I think is a bit worrying, which is why they tackled this. It's also a public health campaign, just raising people's awareness. And I've just taken a screenshot from their website looking at all the different things that they have out there just to inform us all of how we can protect our hearing. They have an app where I just did this the other day. It's not your usual hearing test app where it tests your hearing based on pure tones. This tests how well you can hear what someone's saying in noise, in different levels of noise. And for me personally, when I do the audiometric tests, it comes out perfect. I test myself or get a proper professional test every few years, and it comes out perfect. They don't notice any hearing loss, and I don't believe that for a second. I think I've done enough critical listening where I can just pick out these tones, and I'm able to cheat their test. I know my hearing's not perfect, and this noise test, hearing in noise, really highlights for me what I've lost in my hearing. I know in crowded, noisy situations, I can't hear very well anymore. It's what's called hidden hearing loss. So I suggest download their app. It's free. I think it's Android and an iPhone. And just do a test. It takes a few minutes. It'll give you an idea of where your hearing's at for hearing in noise and this hidden hearing loss. Right. That brings us on to really the important bit. The third strand of the WHO's work is to develop a regulatory framework for control of recreational sound exposure. And that's what we do. It's live events. It's both looking at the big outdoor music festivals all the way right down to the small music venues. We have a little PA on a stick. It includes everybody, all live events. They're planning to release this in 2021. All the draft reports, I've seen a few of the draft reports, which I can't speak of because they're confidential at the moment, but they're coming out now. We're discussing them. We're debating them. and the final release is scheduled for next year. So what will this mean for us? What is kind of in the pipeline? Well, you see a shot here. This was from mid-February in Geneva. We were in the World Health Organization headquarters to, I guess, discuss this and debate ideas. And shockingly, out of those 50 to 70 people who were involved, there were, I believe, 4 of us who were engineers. Everyone else were health experts. They were government officials. They knew nothing about engineering, and some of them, I'm convinced, had never been to a rock show before. So I sat there representing the engineering side and said, look, these are the levels that we're dealing with. This is what audiences expect to hear, and they're not going to be happy if we don't reach those levels. And I don't think they believed me. They didn't believe me that our concerts are at the level that they're at. When I told them about the low end that we deliver, again, there were some eye rolls in there. They thought I was talking nonsense.
Field trip.
What's that?
You guys need a field trip.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good luck getting those guys to a rock show. I think they wouldn't come anywhere near. But usefully, by the end of that week, I think we had kind of opened some eyes. We really pushed, the 4 of us that were there really pushed the point hard that you can't just regulate for this. You can't just say, here's your number, you can't pass this, full stop. What we really emphasized with that was that before you start talking numbers, promote good system design. Get the system design right in the first place. If you can get a good system design, I think that avoids all the other issues they're talking about here. If we can limit those 140 dBc exposures to the people in the front row, I don't think the World Health Organization is going to have much of a problem for 100 dBA at front of house. I don't think that's going to be a problem. At least they haven't indicated that'll be a problem. So I don't think they're going to be coming out with something that says we need to clamp down on our levels. I don't think that's what it's going to be. What it's going to be is guidelines for best practice. These are some things to look at for system design. If you put these things in place, you should be able to hit these fairly loose targets. We're still looking at 100 dBA measured over an hour, 60 minutes. That's pretty forgiving. Yeah, you can do quite a lot of transient and dynamics work in your mix with 100 dBA over an hour. DBC, they're undecided about right now. At present, I don't think they're going to be saying a DBC limit at all because the science isn't there. And that's what the WHO needs. They need science on this. They need something to back up what they're saying. So I think DBC, we're not going to have to worry about in the near future. I think it'll come 10, 20, 30 years from now once we know a bit more, if we know a bit more. But the DBA, I think it's going to be 100 dBA over an hour, but that will be applied to everywhere in the audience, not just front of house. So that's what's coming. I think regulations will be adopting this. And my hope is that we can get this regulatory framework to focus on system design and not just legislation and saying, here's your number you can't pass, because I don't think that's useful for us. So that's what's up with the WHO. Stay tuned. We're trying our hardest there to let us engineers kind of get a word in edgewise, but let's just say the health community has some very strong voices, but we're working on it, and I think we've made a lot of progress already. So to wrap it up, I know we are getting close to out of time. Ultimately, here's the life of a live sound engineer. You're trying to design a sound system that safely delivers uncompromising, consistent, high-quality audio to all audience members. Good luck with that. That's no easy thing. And at the exact same time, you need to limit noise pollution or annoyance offsite. Now, again, good luck with that. Those two things put together make our work very, very difficult. So have a read of this AES technical document. It's long, it has a lot of detail, but it highlights areas of best practice that helps you do what you can to meet these two goals simultaneously. We don't have absolute answers. We don't have answers to everything, but we point you in the right direction and kind of say what still is unknown. But there's no kind of two ways about it. We have a difficult job. Like I said, no definitive solutions, but we do have many decades of useful data to draw upon. We have a lot of extra research required, and this is sort of the next stage within AES. We're looking for backing for this research so we can fund it and do it properly and get us some clear answers so we can be safe, but also deliver the best possible shows that we can. And I just want to end on this quote. This was published in the Journal of the Audio Engineering Society 40 years ago. It says, our civil liberties would be eroded by any government dictation or control of our leisure lifestyles, but this intervention can definitely occur sooner or later unless an aroused citizenship assumes the initiative to counteract the tidal wave sweeping our civilization into the insidious undercurrent of oral incapacitance. It is hoped that the profession can hear the whispered hint, if it is not yet deafened into insensibility. So basically, let's take the lead on this as an audio engineering community, as a live sound community. Don't let the government just dictate what we need to be doing. That's why we're involved with the WHO. That's why we're doing this work with the AES. We see where governments may be going with this, and it's not helping us in many situations. We need to be involved. We need to be proactive. And the warning signs were there 40 years ago in print, in black and white. We're still dealing with this. We still haven't quite gotten our act together in those decades. So that's it. Thanks for listening. I think we might have a couple minutes for questions. Hope you enjoyed it.
Nice, great work, Adam. Really interesting research here, and it just looks like a lot more to be done. So I got a couple questions, and if you guys want to, let's say we probably only have time for 2, so you should raise your hand, unmute your mic, and until then, I have this one from Manuel who says, he asked about the free software, so now he says, okay, what about paid software? What software are you using for SPL logging?
I use 10easy. Personally, this has been really used for my research, as Jacob, who's sort of the man behind 10easy, is super communicative. If I have a question, I email him and I get a response in 5 minutes. Nice. For me, that's what I like. But I've also toyed around with Smart. I know they've released some new features recently. But it's, really the ones I've worked with are 10easy and Smart.
Excellent. And let's see, I think Anders has a question. Go ahead, Anders.
Yeah, well, first of all, I can just say that Jakob, which is how his name is said.
Yes.
He's pretty cool. And actually the smart stuff is actually 10easy starting to cooperate. I think they took over the sale of 10easy. That was just a side thing. But about the bandwidth of the sub, I happen to have been into a lot of stuff with this and looked into also what can I say, the base knowledge in the medical community, which is basically lacking. They don't know how to measure, they don't know how to report or anything. But what I found is we have like a 30,000 capacity venue that plays once every week. And we had, of course, a lot of trouble with the neighbors. And one of the things that they wanted, that the customer wanted to do from the beginning, was to limit the amount of sub. We had a quite low, what can I say, SPL in front of house. It was like 91 dB over 15 minutes. And to achieve that level, it was, we had like 3 subs per side in a left-right configuration. That's a double 18s. That was like L-acoustic 18-inch subs. And when you metered it, everything looked perfectly. And you would see, it looked fine. And these few subs could do the energy that was needed for the metering. Over time, of course, the system was not really, there was something wrong. There was something missing. Over time, we then went up to like 12 subs, like 2 times 6. And it helped a bit. And then I think it was last year, we changed it into actually 24 subs total across the front, like what can I say, a mono setup steering the sub. And suddenly the system sounded like a rock concert perfectly. And the sound levels dropped. People started to play less loud, less SPL. meaning that suddenly they had, what can I say, the full spectrum all the way down to the 20 hertz, and it just made it more pleasant. It gave the energy that they needed to feel the concert. So that's something to take, what can I say, in consideration when you do system designs out there. I mean, to have enough low end, I mean, better have a little bit too much that you can turn off than lacking it, because then you will just end up driving it and not get the right balance. That was just a little bit, I mean, I guess we two could talk for hours because I've been very much into this. I had a thing we call it like a bass hangover, which is exactly what you were talking about. I mean, we got some like Function One systems for DJ stuff. And I was out babysitting it once, and after like 12 hours being in close to these systems, I mean, the day after I was feeling like I was having a hangover. And then I started talking around with the other engineers. They had the same thing. And that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the physics are really damaging your body.
Yeah. And I think on the bandwidth point, I mean, John just makes the point in the chat that it's not about more bass, it's about having all the frequencies. And in the research that we've done, what's clear in the publications that are out there for sound quality from the audience experience, the majority of the impact on their subjective assessment is low frequency quality. You get the bass right and everyone is happy magically. And that's about time domain. I think getting the transients right.
Exactly. Yes, I agree totally.
All right, Adam, we're going to start transitioning over, but thank you so much. This has been really great material. So thank you for joining us on Live Sound Summit. Yay.
My pleasure. And if anyone wants to keep up the discussion, shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat with you to the end of time on this sort of thing. So
the
thanks
end
a lot,
of
everyone.
time. What an amazing offer. Wow.
I might not be there till the end of time, but as long as I can stick around.